Hey, well, kia ora, good morning everybody. Can I just say thanks so much for coming out. It's wonderful to be here at Cardinal McCaffrey School, and Peter and his team of teachers are doing a great job here in this school. Obviously we're here because education is super important to our government. Both David and I are recipients of having had good educations. In my own case, as I've said many times before, my parents left school at 15, 16. I was able to get a great state education, first to go on to university and do well for myself and the world, and I think education is without doubt the thing that I've been most focused on since coming to politics 3 years ago. I know David's very focused on it as well. So we are proud to be a government that is prioritising education, because actually if we want to become more prosperous as a country, there's lots of high-paying jobs out there, but we need to be able to make sure our kids can access those jobs into the future by having a good education. You've seen us announce this week our 9 targets. There's lots that the government will continue to do on a range of topics, but we're focusing the public service and our government on delivering a few things well, and also being held accountable to the New Zealand people for the delivery of those things, and 2 of them are in the education space. One is making sure that we can have 80% of our kids at school with regular school attendance, meaning 90% of the term, and the second thing is making sure that we actually have our kids arriving at high school ready to go, having mastered the basics. Attendance is a major problem for us here in New Zealand. The numbers are shameful. There's no other way to describe it. We've been talking about it, both of us, over the last few years, but I can tell you 54% of our kids are not in school with regular school attendance. And that may seem like it's not a biggie. It is a biggie, because by the time they get to 15, they've actually lost 1 year's worth of education and are further behind. So, we've got a clear goal. We want 80% by 2030 to be at school 90% of the time. That would be a fantastic achievement. It's a big, ambitious goal, but I want to say a big thank you to David, who's been very passionate about making sure we have a very thoughtful and a well-led attendance action plan. And I want to say again, mate, you've done a brilliant job just leading us through it and our government through the conversation and making sure we get something that's going to work to actually step change and get us towards that goal. And with that, I'll pass off to David to talk about the announcement in particular.
Well, thanks, Chris. And I'm certainly very proud to be part of a government that is putting attendance front and centre of education policy, which it frankly hasn't been for several years. And one of the results of that is that New Zealand's attendance is not only bad compared with where we were just a few years ago, it's bad compared with just about any country we'd like to compare ourselves with. New Zealand is becoming an outlier on school attendance for all of the wrong reasons. And one of the results of that, as the Prime Minister's just said, is that it's going to affect New Zealand's performance and the lives that people lead for over 80 years, because that's how long kids that we've just seen today will be participating in New Zealand life well into next century. In short, it is not easy to learn at school, but it's impossible to learn if you're not at school, and that's why the government is committed to getting kids back to school regularly, with a target for 80% of kids attending regularly by the end of the decade. However, we're here today to announce a series of initiatives Cabinet's agreed on that will start much sooner than that, in fact, for term 2, which begins in only a few weeks. The first is that we're going to see much better data, and from the start of next term, the Ministry of Education will go from reporting data once a term, and often several months after the term ended, to reporting at the end of each week what the daily attendance rates were for that year. And the objective here is to create a national focus in much the same way that the previous government created a focus on various COVID-19 statistics. We believe that educational attendance is now a crisis with similar long-term effects for New Zealand, and so data will drive the emphasis on attendance with weekly releases of daily data for the previous week. We'll also see a public education campaign around the importance of attendance. This is going to be locally delivered but nationally coordinated. A few weeks ago I was in Hawke's Bay and saw some of this content being generated, and you can picture, for example, items on TikTok and Instagram which show local sports heroes explaining what education had done for them, reaching out for people in that region, saying this is why education is important. You'll also see before the start of next term new new public health guidance. And there's been a lot of questions around this, but the simple truth is that for too long we put public health at the centre of nearly everything, and while that is certainly important, we've seen the emphasis placed on education fall down the totem pole of national priorities, and education needs to be back up there. So you'll see that prepared primarily by the Ministry of Health, but something on a par with what they have in the UK, where they give parents a clear decision tree of, if your kid has this symptom, you need to either keep them home from school, see a doctor or get more information, or in some cases it may actually be acceptable to go to school. Not every ailment means that you should not attend school. What parents need is clear information from the government to help them make that kind of decision. In the longer term, we will see a number of initiatives that are more detailed. They relate to making sure we get the best value out of attendance services, that we set priorities for school boards, that we take the attendance strategies that are working at some schools I've visited recently and make those a template for every school in the country. You'll also see a traffic light system introduced where kids who are attending regularly are green. Kids who have some attendance issues are orange to be dealt with by the school, and those who have persistent non-attendance are deemed red to be dealt with by the Ministry of Education. There's been a huge amount of emphasis and coverage of this issue in recent weeks on the place of fines in government policy. I can understand why there's a lot of emphasis, because it's something that certainly generates discussion, but I think it needs to be placed in the context of a wider range of initiatives the government's taking, and that apply if you end up in a red traffic light situation, having had multiple attempts to get you to comply and go to school, and a judgment by those involved that it's not a case of can't, but actually a matter of won't. That is the circumstance in this wider policy environment where fines become relevant. The third part of this initiative is even further out than this year. It involves understanding how it's become possible that while the government provides literally billions of dollars of free education each year, a lot of people have decided the value is not there and they've deprioritised going to school. For example, the Education Review Office in a recent review found that almost 3/4 of parents are comfortable with their child missing 1 week a term, or 10% of their school. Now we need to better understand and equip people with the reasons to go to school and actually feel that they're getting value, and there's been a lot of reporting and speculation around misbehaviour in the classroom, the value of the curriculum and what's being taught, bullying and mental health concerns. I don't think any government has taken the time to properly understand that and understand why education is not being valued as much as most people would hope by so many parents, and actually meet in the middle and find a way to make education viewed as valuable and relevant again. So that is our basic direction, but obviously there'll be more questions and we're really happy to take them.
Happy to take your questions.
With the traffic light system, so it's both for schools and for families or parents. How do you envisage it sort of practically working? So would a school go into sort of a red light setting? Would also parents go into a red light setting? How do you sort of see it working?
Well, just bear in mind that the traffic light part fits into phase 2. What we're announcing today is the immediate stuff. So in terms of how it would work, we envisage it would be student-based and therefore family-based. Obviously, if a particular school had a lot of students who were deemed to be red light, then in that instance, I think you'd be asking, is there something that needs to be done at the school level? But also just hasten to emphasise that the Cabinet hasn't actually agreed on the exact details of that part of the policy. It has agreed with a paper I've taken that signals what our overall direction, the immediate things we're announcing today, the things that we'll do for the rest of this year, and the things we'll do over the rest of the parliamentary term to solve those deeper problems.
And so then if a family then becomes red light, is that when you're talking about sort of, you're obviously not announcing, but that would be perhaps the stick approach, the fines come in, or would it be sort of a social investment approach that you'd be taking to those red light families?
Well, it's going to be both. I mean, I think what's important to understand, there's so many reasons why people aren't attending. Some parents aren't sending their kids to school because they have no money and they're sending their kids out to work. Others are not sending their kids to school because they do have enough money, but they wanted to get a cheaper airfare to Fiji in the last week of term. Now, obviously, in those two cases, there's going to be a different approach from the government. Finding someone with no money probably is not going to make the boat go faster, but if it's more a case of won't than can't, and somebody just doesn't want to live up to the expectation in law that you should send your kid to school whenever possible, that's when a fine is potentially the right thing to do. But you'll notice in this whole discussion, it's quite a few steps down the track.
What feedback have you had from schools and officials about how manageable the extra reporting will be? Are you confident they have the resources to really upscale that reporting?
The way that we're always very mindful that everyone who works in New Zealand education has absolutely had it up to here with more compliance burden being put on them by the government of the day. So that's front of mind. The second thing I would say is that we will be putting directives on boards of trustees to make attendance a priority, just as we have for the Ministry of Education. It's astonishing the previous government did not do that. However, we'll also be learning from some of the more effective schools. For example, in the last few weeks I've visited Glen Innes School in Auckland. You may know I visited Freiburg High, which actually is doing an excellent job on attendance. We'll be looking, absolutely, Mani Rewa Intermediate, it's a superb example, and we'll be looking to take the learnings from those schools and say, look, here's a template of what effective boards of trustees can do, and we would like to see all schools rolling out these kinds of strategies. And if I was to put it in a nutshell what they do, they usually have a very good person internally, a good relation with an external attendance officer. They usually have good connections with charities who help solve some of the more resource-oriented problems that people have, and they'll usually have a good relationship with the local youth aid police, and they use all of those people that have slightly different perspectives and information to get kids back to school. Now, obviously it's going to vary with different communities, but we'd like to see more of that rolled out.
You both talked about $8 million into attendance in its budget in 2022. How much money are you putting into these kids back to school?
Actually, what has been allowed by the previous government for attendance services, if you take the Regional Response Fund and also the attendance service, adds up to about $48 million. So we'll see that amount of money annually. We don't believe that we need more money. What we do believe is that we need to ask about the effectiveness of some of that spending.
The schools say they're having their own authority to put options in place that suit their individual communities is what is needed here, and you're saying they don't need any more money to address the problem.
What I'm saying is that $48 million is a pretty considerable spend on attendance. The question is who directs it and who checks that we're getting performance in return for it. I don't think the previous government was very clear on that. What we're going to be doing in some of those phase 2 things for the rest of this year is asking, well, what do those strategies look like at your Mani Rewa Intermediates, at your GI school, at your Freiburg High? And I'd have to say that local control is really important in those initiatives. So we'll be looking at not how do we spend more money, but how do we use the money we're spending to get better results.
You've both talked about how short-term targets. They had the 70% in 2024 and 75% in 2026 for regular attendance. Why have you gone for a 2030 80% target?
Well, look, again, what we're doing there is we're identifying 9 key targets that we think matter most to Kiwis, and 2 of them are in the education space. As I said, attendance and academic achievement are the focus there. What we'll be doing is reporting quarterly progress against those 9 targets, but what we're setting ourselves is a direction of travel with a clear goal, an ambitious goal. It's going to be hard, let's be under no illusions about that, 80%, 90% regular attendance, but we're going to set that goal for December 2030. But why we're doing that is very clearly to make sure that it's crystal clear to the public service, it's crystal clear to our government, and it's also crystal clear to New Zealanders that they can hold us to account on delivering against the things that matter most to them. And so we know if we can get our kids back to school, if we can get our kids actually ready to go to high school with the basics understood, set up for success, those are the 2 must-do things. There's lots of things we've got to do in education, there's lots of other indicators, but at the end of the day, those 2 things are are the most important things that we have to work hard on. So we'll be updating those quarterly against those 9 targets. David, as he said, has got regular monitoring of data as well.
Just on my question, Mr. Seymour, why is it a longer term target?
First of all, we know that 80% is possible. New Zealand has been in the 70s for regular attendance in the past. We also believe 80% is absolutely necessary if New Zealand's going to solve its long-term problems of having a more cohesive, happier, productive society that can afford the lifestyle that New Zealanders want. How do you get there? Well, actually, I don't think the previous government has had a firm strategy to do that. We do, and we're starting to announce some of those initiatives already. Others will take more work. The other thing that I'll be doing in the coming months is setting out the strategy of how we realistically think we can get there quarter by quarter and year by year. There'll be some students where it's relatively easy. The reasons they're not attending can be easily solved, and that's good. There will be other students that have formed a habit of non-attendance early in their primary school years, and getting them back to regular attendance is going to take several years, just as we prevent new students from forming that habit. So once you break it down, in order to have a goal, you've got to have a strategy to get there, and that means understanding the different reasons why kids aren't attending, and then having a tactic to actually overcome those reasons. So you will see those waypoints, but we didn't hesitate to set the goal because 80 is where we need to be, and we know that it's possible in that time frame.
And I think just say that is a different approach. What you're seeing under our government, we're setting ourselves some very ambitious targets. We're saying there they are 6 years out, but then we're actually putting in place the quarterly action plans, as you're seeing, as we march ourselves towards progress towards those goals. So as David has highlighted, there's multiple phases to this. We know it's a complex issue. We know it's multifaceted. There's lots of things we've got to be able to work on. But first quarter, this is what we're doing. Next quarter, there'll be another set of actions. We keep driving towards it. And the important thing is that we'll be able to have the conversations with the ministers and the CEOs of these government agencies to say, actually, what actions and plans are you implementing? What things are you trying? What is working? What is not working to deliver against that target and goal? So the reason for the goals is to focus and to give everyone focus. And then important, as David just said, we've got to have targets, but you've got to have a plan and a strategy that actually is then executable and gets changed.
You're not
Yes.
a fan of keeping government out of people's family lives. Why are you proposing to set up a health checklist for parents on whether or not they should send their kids to school? Aren't they the best ones to decide that?
Well, I think ultimately it's always the parent's choice whether they send the kid to school. We can't force them. However, the government does have a role in providing information about when it is safe, when your kid going to school may be a risk to others' health, and when you need to get more information. That is the government's job. I also just make the point that over the last few years, the government has put a huge amount of info into the information space about public health. What we're effectively going to achieve is to rebalance some of that information that's all been one direction. Actually, education and health matter. The trick is informing parents about when they may need to make which decision.
Prime Minister,
Sorry, Amelia.
Prime Minister, you've said that we should just steal what Estonia is doing because they've had such success in turning around the education statistics.
No, that's not what I've said. What I've said is
this morning you said we should just steal what countries.
No. What I've said is there's a range of things that are working really well in New Zealand. We've got schools that have got great attendance results, for example. We should look at what they're doing and see whether we can replicate that in other schools. Likewise, there's other small advanced countries all around the world that wrestle with some of the same challenges. Let's also be innovative and look at things that may be working overseas that we can bring into New Zealand or adapt into New Zealand. Let's look at the things that are already working in New Zealand. So all I was just meaning by that was there's lots of other small advanced economies similar to New Zealand or countries. There are things that they've done well. Ireland's done a great job on its education system. Others have done well on other parts of the
Universal free school lunches, and the latest evidence shows that the school lunch program actually does improve school attendance. So I guess, David Seymour, will you adjust your position that school lunches doesn't improve attendance, and have you seen that latest evidence?
Yeah, I have, and what it shows is that the change in school attendance is absolutely marginal. If free school lunches was our strategy to raise attendance, I suspect we'd be spending billions of dollars before we got a result. So, yep, there's been more evidence that shows a mildly statistically significant change. I think if you want to get into the stats, the improvement was 1.64%, but the margin of error was 1.63%. So by 1/100th of a percentage point, you've now found a connection. However, it also showed that if it's 340 million for 25% of kids, if you extended it to all kids, you'd get almost no benefit because that upper 75% of kids by EQI don't really respond. It's the lower or higher EQI, lower socioeconomic kids who do respond, and therefore it's not really clear what new information's been added or how it would change the government's position, which is to continue the Healthy School Lunch program, but do it in a way that's far more economical. And I think the thing that a lot of people have missed, and perhaps the Labour Party would do well to remember, is that Healthy School Lunches were a fiscal cliff. They were not funded after 2024. I'm actually taking from zero, which they budgeted next year, up to an amount that will allow Healthy School Lunches to be funded. So what you could report is that this government is saving the school lunch program from the Labour Party's irresponsibility.
But sorry, Amelia, I'll just say to you, that there are multi-facets and multi-reasons for why kids, either from their households, their schools or their communities, are not attending school. And there is lots of things that we've got to work on at the same time. And it's a complex issue. And so that might be a piece of it, but it's not the only thing. And so there's lots of things, as David's been alluding to, that we've got to work our way through.
Totally. There is, but just back.
Can I also say Estonia has a flat tax, so if we're going to take Amelia Wade's logic, then maybe it goes somewhere.
No, it's not what I said. What I said is there's lots to learn from other small advanced countries.
I heard the interview, and I prefer his characterisation to yours.
Okay, so sorry, just back on school lunches. David Seymour, you have said that you are looking at cutting the funding of it by half, but you have just said that you want to do it more economically. So, can you guarantee that children who are currently getting school lunches will continue to get school lunches even if the funding does change and you find different ways of rolling it out?
I can't. I think they probably will, but I also think that around the margin there's going to be some kids who aren't actually using them, would opt out if they could, for example. So there's a very strong chance that it will be exactly the same kids, but there's also a chance that once you come down to surplus and wastage, you find actually we can do more for kids in greater need if we have a slightly different set of kids. So I'm not going to give you that absolute guarantee, but we're so close to it, I don't think that you'll be disappointed with the outcome.
Last question.
Sorry, Brady.
The March report on attendance found that it was an extra 3 days for the underserved children. Is that not significant? It's an extra 3 days at school on average a year.
Well, I mean, 200 days, 1.64%, that's 3 days. So you want to talk in days, you want to talk percentages. I don't think it makes a huge difference.
Every day counts though in education.
Yeah, it sure does, but here's the thing, $340 million to get a relatively small number of kids going to school for an extra 3 days. If that's our strategy, we're never going to get there, and that's why I think it's easy to put a lot of emphasis on school lunches, but actually, what we're doing is going to achieve as much, if not more, than what the previous guys did, and there's a whole lot of other things that we need to start doing that they were woefully neglectful for. I mean, let's just remember here, a bit of political memory. Jan Zanetti was acquitted by the Privileges Committee for misleading the House about attendance data, and I was on the Privileges Committee. We had to acquit her because the committee found it credible. She had no idea what was going on in her own office.
All right, last question.
Okay, public health guidance is expert driven. What symptoms are you saying that families should allow their children to go back to school with? Because I think they'll be really interested to understand this when they've been receiving public health guidance in the last few years. And yes, everyone is more aware of symptoms. So what is acceptable to you? I'm going to give you one assurance, which is that David Seymour will not be making any medical judgments for your child whatsoever. That will be left to the experts.
All right, team. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot, guys.
We'll
see you later.
See ya. Bye-bye.